In July 1947, the United States military announced that it had recovered a flying saucer. Then, less than a day later, it took the announcement back. That single reversal, made in the span of 24 hours, created one of the most enduring mysteries in modern history. What really crashed outside Roswell, New Mexico? And why did the official story change so fast? It began weeks earlier, in June 1947, on a remote ranch in Lincoln County, New Mexico. A rancher named W. Brazel, known to locals as Mac, found strange debris scattered across his land. Witnesses later described the material as tinfoil, rubber strips, sticks, and lightweight metallic fragments. Brazel gathered some of it and, on July 7th, brought it into town, where he reported the find to the Roswell sheriff. The sheriff contacted the Roswell Army Airfield, home to the 509th Bomb Group, the only nuclear-capable unit in the world at that time. Given the sensitivity of that base, any unusual crash nearby was never going to stay quiet for long. On July 8, 1947, the Public Information Office at Roswell Army Airfield released a statement to the press. It said, in plain language, that the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group had recovered a flying disc. Newspapers across the country ran the story within hours. The Roswell Daily Record put it on the front page. For one afternoon, the United States military had officially told the world it was in possession of a flying saucer. But that is where the story changes. Within a day, the account was reversed. Brigadier General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas, held a press conference and displayed the recovered debris. According to Ramey, the material was not a flying disc at all. It was, he said, a weather balloon, along with a radar reflector device used to track it. Photographs from that day show Ramey and Colonel Thomas DuBose posing with foil and sticks that looked, to most observers, exactly like the tinfoil and rubber Brazel had described. The headline changed overnight from a captured saucer to an empty weather instrument. For years, that seemed to settle it. A rancher found debris, the Army investigated, and the explanation turned out to be mundane. Think of it this way. A weather balloon crashing in the desert was not, on its own, a rare event in 1947. Thousands were launched across the country that year, and most fell back to Earth without ever making a headline. Case closed, at least on paper, except for one detail that would not go away. Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer originally sent to collect the debris, later said publicly that what he examined in the field did not match an ordinary weather balloon. He described metal that could not be bent, dented, or burned, and markings on some fragments that he could not identify. Marcel's account, given decades after the event, became one of the most cited pieces of testimony in Roswell lore. Skeptics point out that he was recalling a single afternoon from nearly 30 years earlier, and that human memory is not a recording device. It reshapes itself every time it is retold. Supporters counter that Marcel was a trained intelligence officer whose job was to identify wreckage, and that his description was strikingly specific and consistent across multiple interviews. Was he describing classified technology beyond what a standard balloon would use? Or was memory, stretched across decades, filling in gaps that were never really there? This is where the case becomes difficult to dismiss with a single sentence. In 1978, physicist and UFO researcher Stanton Friedman interviewed Marcel, and the story re-entered public attention. In 1980, authors Charles Berlitz and William Moore published a book calling the weather balloon story a cover story, arguing that the real wreckage had been quietly flown to Wright Field in Ohio for study, and that what the public saw in Fort Worth was a substitute. That claim was widely disputed and never confirmed with documentary evidence, but it permanently changed how the public understood Roswell. From that point forward, the case was no longer just a story about a rancher and a balloon. It became, for millions of people, a story about a government that could not be trusted to tell the truth about what fell from its own sky. Now consider what the government itself eventually admitted. In 1994, following a congressional inquiry led by New Mexico Congressman Stephen Schiff, the General Accounting Office ordered the Air Force to search its records. The resulting 1994 report, titled Roswell Report, Fact versus Fiction, concluded that the debris almost certainly came from Project Mogul, a then top-secret program using high-altitude balloon trains to detect Soviet nuclear tests from the upper atmosphere. Because Mogul was classified, the report argued officers on the ground in 1947 may not have recognized the material, which could explain both the confusion and the sudden correction. Consider the timeline again with that in mind. A rancher finds odd debris. a young intelligence officer, unfamiliar with a secret balloon program he was never briefed on, examines it and calls his superiors. A press release goes out using a dramatic phrase before anyone above him has verified what it actually is. Then higher command steps in, recognizes the material for what the government report says it was, and corrects the record within a day. That sequence explains a great deal, but it does not explain everything. But the records do not fully agree with each other, and that is the most disturbing detail of all. Some witnesses in later decades also described recovered bodies, not just wreckage. In 1997, the Air Force issued a second report addressing those claims directly. It proposed that stories of small humanoid bodies stemmed from separate, unrelated events in the 1950s. Anthropomorphic crash test dummies dropped during parachute testing, and, in some cases, injured or deceased airmen from actual aircraft accidents. The report suggested that witnesses recalling these events decades apart may have unintentionally merged them into a single memory. For many longtime Roswell researchers, that explanation felt like a stretch. Was this a genuine effort to account for confused memories, or a convenient way to close a case that had already outgrown its original evidence? If you enjoy unexplained cases built on real documents and testimony rather than rumor, subscribe to Alien Radar and tell me in the comments what you think actually happened at Roswell. Look closely at the actual, verified record, and a clear pattern appears. It is a confirmed fact that Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release calling the debris a flying disc. It is a confirmed fact that the story was retracted within roughly 24 hours. It is a confirmed fact that Project Mogul existed, was classified in 1947, and used balloon trains resembling the recovered debris. What remains a claim, not a confirmed fact, is Jesse Marcel's description of unusual, unbendable metal offered decades after the event. What remains speculation is the idea of alien bodies, which the Air Force attributes to unrelated 1950s incidents, but which some witnesses and researchers still reject outright. The most likely conventional explanation remains Project Mogul, supported by declassified program records and matching physical descriptions. It does not, however, fully satisfy every witness account, and it does not erase the fact that the military's very first public statement, in its own words, described a flying disc. A mystery becomes stronger when the records themselves contradict each other, and Roswell has never stopped doing exactly that. So the question is not simply whether extraterrestrials crashed in the New Mexico desert in 1947. The real question is why the United States military, in its very first public statement about the case, chose the words flying disc, and then changed its story before the next day's newspapers even hit the stands.